Boker Tov, good morning. We are starting, I shall speak in English. I shall speak in English as one of the panelists, Senator Mitchell, will be speaking in English, so we decided that it's more appropriate that the whole session will be conducted in English. I'm pleased to open the first session of the conference. I'll try to be brief in my introductory comments, which reminds me of the story about a dinner to honor a Nobel Prize, a new Nobel Prize laureate. And the master of ceremony that opened it said, I'll be very brief, like I said beforehand. Our guest of honor is a graduate of Yale University. Yale is Y-A-L-E. Y stands for youthfulness. And then he goes into a longish description how the guest of honor is old, he knew already to write and read. 4 years old, he knew already by heart the Holy Scriptures, and on and on and on for about half an hour. Then he says A stands for abilities. Another half an hour on the abilities of the guest of honor, and so on and so forth. After about 2 hours, half of the people already left. The whole dinner was almost a disaster. And then the guest of honor stood up in order to respond. And he said, thank you very much for your kind words. We are all, you the guests here and myself, are extremely fortunate that I'm not a graduate of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. So, being brief, I'll go on. And the topic of our session today is the Israeli-American alliance. I myself am not sure that the term alliance is appropriate to describe the Israeli-American relationship, possibly partly a de facto alliance, but not a full-fledged formal defense alliance that exists in other areas like NATO and so on, and I'll come back to this point in a few minutes. We know, of course, who will be the next administration in the United States. We're not sure yet who will be the next administration in Israel, and there are several possibilities there. We have a sense of what the new administration in Washington might be doing in regard to the Middle East. We are not entirely sure. But one thing is constant or sure about the Middle East, and these are opportunities and challenges that Israel face and the United States together. Yesterday, Ehud Barak elaborated on the opportunities and the challenges. Let me just repeat and say, focusing on three major opportunities, and these are the Israeli-Palestinian peace negotiations, Israeli-Syrian peace negotiations, and the overall Arab peace initiative. The challenge, or the main challenge, that I'll refer to it in a minute, is, of course, the Iranian possible nuclearization. Now, as far as the opportunities are concerned, it seems to me that the American role is very critical. I'm repeating perhaps the elementary, but it seems to me that it's terribly important to recognize the centrality and the criticality of the American role in peace negotiations. There is a school of thought, partly in Israel, that claims that, in fact, the American role might be sometimes marginal and sometimes even counterproductive. I myself subscribe to the notion that the American involvement is extremely important and central. Needless to say, if the regional parties are not ready or don't recognize the importance of engagement and of reaching an agreement, then the negotiations cannot get off the ground, but the American role is critical in later phases of the negotiations, and certainly towards the final conclusion, hopefully positive final conclusion of negotiations. The American role could also be to compensate through different means costs incurred by one of the parties to the agreement, or in case the other party defects on some of its obligations. While the Israeli-Palestinian negotiations would possibly remain difficult to finally resolve in an agreement, it seems to me, and I am saying it cautiously, the Israeli-Syrian negotiations appear to be much more sensitive to American active participation. Here, the new administration in Washington could play a different role from the one pursued by the Bush administration, which was quite indifferent to the Israeli-Syrian initial dialogue. Let me just add here a comment, and this is that there is a structural difference, it seems to me, between the role in mediation between parties in a conflict, between uninvolved, uncommitted mediators that, according to the literature and so on, perhaps are more, because they are quote-unquote honest brokers, can play a more positive role in the negotiations, and an intermediary that is deeply involved and has a stake in the outcome, and also the ability both to compensate and sometimes to apply pressure on the parties. And needless to say, the United States is in the second role. So this is as far as the opportunities. As far as the challenges, the main challenge is, of course, the Iranian possible nuclearization. It is still possible, and I hope that it will happen, that there will be a successful outcome of the possible negotiations, engagement, direct engagement between the United States and Iran, which apparently is what the new administration in Washington is planning. However, if it fails, and here I come back to the second point, the challenge, the notion of alliance. However, if these negotiations fail, and if Iran becomes a nuclear power, then what will happen would be the gradual emergence of an Israeli-Iranian nuclear deterrence relationship, and of course, American-Iranian nuclear deterrence relationship. Now, it seems to me that as far as the Iranian-Israeli nuclear deterrence relationship, it will be quite unstable. And this is not because Israel is weak in the nuclear area. As is well known, Israel is much more superior in its nuclear capability and so on and so forth. But the question about the stability of nuclear deterrence relationships is not necessarily the strength of one of the parties, but several other dimensions and features of nuclear deterrence relationships. And because it seems to me that it will be unstable, then possibly, very possibly, American role in involvement in it will be important. Here I come back to the notion of alliance, which is the main topic of our session. It seems to me that formalizing an American-Israeli defense relationship play a certain role, possibly an important role, in enhancing the stability of an Israeli-Iranian nuclear relationship. I don't want to elaborate it or to go into it because I don't want to take more of your time. We are very, very fortunate indeed to have two distinguished speakers who will tackle the whole subject of the American-Israeli alliance, and hopefully also specifically the question of negotiations, peace negotiations, and the possibility of formalizing the alliance. First, Senator George Mitchell. He is universally known, but I shall refer to just some of the landmarks in his impressive biography. He joined the United States Senate in 1982 and was the Senate Majority Leader 1989 to 1995. He later was the United States Special Envoy to Northern Ireland, and he chaired the all-party peace negotiations which led ultimately to the Good Friday Agreement. I might really say that over the past decade, the two persons, the two men who really succeeded in concluding peace negotiations between two very difficult opponents are Senator Mitchell and Prime Minister Blair. I think that one has to recognize that. Since he left the Senate and his mission, he entered both the worlds of business and academia very successfully. The second speaker is Professor Itamar Rabinovich. I don't think I have to introduce Itamar to this audience, but let me just say that he is an extraordinary example of activity and success in several domains. A scholar who is prime authority on the Middle East and especially on Syria. Let me just mention that his new book just was published. Israeli ambassador to Washington and chief Israeli negotiator in the peace talks with Syria. And finally, the president of Tel Aviv University. But more important, an old colleague and friend. Senator Mitchell, please.